What if your office building could learn, adapt, and respond to your daily routine in the exact same way that your smartphone does? What if the spaces that we work in weren't just places to plug in, but places that helped us feel more connected, inspired, even part of a broader community? Well, in today's episode, I'm catching up with the co-founder and CEO of HQO. What a cracking name that is. And together we're going to explore how the company is transforming the commercial real estate world with its tech platform. And while real estate has long been seen as a slow mover when it comes to tech adoption, HQO is challenging that narrative by turning buildings into intelligent, responsive environments. Environments that support how people actually live and work today, not the way that people used to work. And we're not just talking about smart buildings or smart cities. We're talking about enabling flexible space management and IoT integration to a different mindset and thinking far beyond square footage and rent rolls. I want to talk about how they're using data to improve human experiences, why hybrid working is simply the new normal or work, and how buildings can be reimagined as platforms that facilitate relationships, not just transactions. So as commercial real estate wakes up to the digital future, what lessons can we learn from the influence of tech on our physical spaces? Can a workplace app actually create a community? And is the future of the city less about building new spaces and more about making the ones we have work better? With that scene perfectly set, it's time to introduce you to today's guest. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me, Neil. I'm Chase Garbarino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of HQO. HQO is a real estate experience technology company, headquartered in Boston, but serving 24 different countries around the world. And we really provide a operating system for commercial real estate buildings to cater to all the different personas that need to use and engage with the built environment. So you think about the end user of tenants is an obvious one, but there are lots of other personas in terms of litany of different vendors that service the building, the different property personas in terms of the people that service the customers, investors. So it's a pretty complicated ecosystem that is very traditionally offline. So we do a lot of work to give them modern digital tools to much more efficiently provide great experiences. We spend a majority of our time as humanity in the built environment, and so we think it needs to be modernized in order to really move civilization forward.
Yeah, I'm really with you on this. And one of the things I try and do every day on this tech podcast is get people thinking differently about how technology is impacting areas that we don't associate with technology. And I think it's fair to say that commercial real estate has a reputation for being somewhat of a slow adopter to digital technology. So I've got to ask, what inspired you to bring a tech-driven approach to the industry? And what were the real-world problems in offices or commercial buildings that you were aiming to solve when you launched the platform? Because there's got to be a story there, including what a great name as well. Please tell me that just come off the top of your head, because people would spend thousands trying to brainstorm an idea and not get a name as good as that.
Yeah, well, I wish I could take credit for the name, but it is a part of the story. So I'll give you a little bit of the background. So, my co-founders and I have been working together for 20 years at this point. So we started our first company when we were in college. Sadly, I was the person who took computer science classes. And my co-founder is smarter than me. He never took a computer science class, and he's our CTO. So by default, I became the mouth. I'm the business side, simply because I lost out on the other job. But we built a company. We were fascinated kind of coming out of the great financial crisis, right? Kind of, 2007, 2008, 2009. And, the United States, there were these areas, particularly in Boston where we were, that were once, innovative hubs. The corridor in Boston was known for the mini computers in the 60s, 70s. It was a real tech hub, everything coming out of Harvard and MIT. And we completely lost it in the internet age to Silicon Valley. And you see the same thing in terms of manufacturing hubs. And these areas that were like once innovative, if you think about automobiles in Detroit or what have you, I mean, you're in Birmingham, right? Obviously the center of the Industrial Revolution. And so we were really interested in how do you reinvigorate innovation in cities? Because cities, in my opinion, are kind of humanity's greatest product, right? They bring people together in a way that drives economic progress and really advances civilization. And so, that was a very different business. It was a digital media platform that, we launched in 44 markets, and it really focused on kind of content communication, newsletters, job postings, and we wanted to develop software for like how do you facilitate kind of city interaction and really drive economic opportunity. And we sold it to a big media company that, great people, but they were doing what they do, which is, a traditional media model. So we kind of moved on, and this is where, at the peak of WeWork's valuation in 2017, we were kind of kicking around in, early stage startup land of messing around with different ideas. And we were fascinated with, hey, we have this real estate services business that's trading like a technology company, but it's not really a technology company. And, because we had been so kind of deeply ingrained in, city economies and how that worked, we're fascinated with commercial real estate. And when you take a step back, commercial real estate is the physical platform, of our cities. And again, we think cities are the greatest product. And we said, it's kind of crazy that there isn't a software operating system for this. And so if we can do it for a building, we can do it for a city. And so that's how we got started. And with regards to the name, I had come up with a bunch of terrible names like Space Works and Space this, Space that. And luckily, one of our first designers came up with Headquarters Optimized as HQO, and it was much cleaner. And I'm no longer allowed to be in the naming department.
What a great story. I love that. And one of the other things that I'm reading more and more about is workplace experience apps. They're rapidly becoming a requirement as both tenants and employees demand more seamless, more engaging experiences in the places that they work in. So how does HQO's technology improve tenant engagement on that day-to-day level? And what kind of features or services does your app provide to office tenants? Anything you can share around that and how it enhances tenants' experience or even a sense of community in a building?
When we started in 2018, kind of that, the vision really hasn't changed. I would say the environment has changed a little bit, but we really wanted to be able to facilitate kind of a, you want to call it a door-to-door day in the life, right? When you get up and you go to work, how do you think of every step of the employee journey at a property? And, that's when I say it's changed in that I think people's work situations are more flexible. However, that was starting before COVID, right? The reason that WeWork had their rise was because work is more dynamic, right? And that's being driven obviously by the internet. So, we don't think that there was much kind of change in what was going to happen from COVID. I think it just accelerated some of the underlying trends. And so, the biggest impact we saw was that expectation when everybody worked at home for so long and you get to customize your own setup from a work perspective, your expectation of when you go back into, an office workplace is just significantly higher. So, what our application does is we'll tie into, transit and commute tools. If you're taking shuttles and things like that, we'll try to improve the commute, which obviously is the hardest one since we don't really control, transportation infrastructure, but where we can plug in, we will. We provide digital key cards. So when you think about kind of ingress into the building, how do you make that significantly more seamless? We power visitor management. So, when you're stuck sitting in a lobby and, you're writing your name on a pen and paper, you should never have to do that again. You should have an Apple Wallet pass or Android Wallet pass that makes it very easy to get in. We have tools, as the world becomes more flexible and significantly more of a building becomes, say, communal or flex. Can I book amenities? Can I book space? Can I book classes, fitness, things like that? We make that all available through the application. So we have to inventory the space in buildings at significant scale. And then we'll tie into retail and amenities and facilitate payments and all that stuff. So we really want to make we call it the 99% of employees who don't pay the rent and probably don't know who their landlord, we make that very consumer experience like. And then we have a number of other tools for, say, the office manager or the people who deal with the property management teams, so work orders and ticketing, things like that, as well as the financial personas who have to, check lease terms and do rent payment and all those things. So we have to, when we think about tenant experience, there's a number of different personas. And, we've moved into asset classes beyond just office. So we serve multifamily, we serve industrial. So, the dynamics of those are obviously different. You're dealing with trucks coming in and out at industrial. You're dealing with significantly higher compliance in terms of workplace safety and some of that stuff. So the built environment's very dynamic. We've put over $200 million into building our platform, so it's gotten pretty comprehensive. It's fun to see kind of how dynamic what was a very static industry and how dynamic it is really becoming.
And of course, another big change in recent years is the rise of hybrid work, changed almost everything and what people need and expect inside their office space too. And when I was doing a little research on you guys, I was reading a couple of years ago, I think HQO even acquired JLL Jet, which is a hybrid workplace app, which also supports flexible work arrangements. So how is hybrid work influencing the way commercial landlords and employers are using technology, and what solutions does HQO offer as when it comes to hybrid work tools or flex management to make flexible hybrid environment work more smoothly, not just to the employees, but to the companies too? So much going on here with technology that we didn't see 5 years ago, but anything you could share around that?
Yeah, I mean, we think hybrid work in the future will just be called work, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, from a commercial real estate perspective, the way the industry is so stuck in the ways of the long-term lease that they view what is essentially a shorter contract, because, we're talking about a 10-year lease versus a 30-day lease or a, 1-year lease. They view it almost as a completely different asset class when fundamentally it's not. It's just a shorter contract. Like the rest of us typically run on shorter contracts than commercial real estate. So they think it's a wildly different product when in reality it's not. And the fundamental problem for the asset manager, the people who are managing the investor's money for that asset, is that it was very cost ineffective to deliver something that wasn't a long-term lease, right? Typically, you take the long-term lease and they're doing heavy change to the physical layout of the property. And so if you're going to invest that kind of money up front into the space, then you do need that long-term commitment to make back that investment into the space. Now they have standard layouts, they have bundled services of the furniture, the Wi-Fi, food and beverage, amenities, things like that. And as space becomes much more a service, the landlords really need tools to sell that product cost effectively. And so that's what we provide them is they have a set of tools where they need to cater to the traditional long-term tenant, but more and more of their building is a mix of those traditional long-term tenants and then flexible space or amenity space, conferencing space, right? So, I like to talk about it. And you and I were chatting before this about how my wife works at Primark. And one of the things that I say to all of our customers is when you look at like a Primark or, some of these people in retail and fashion, like the amount of SKUs of product lines they have is incredible. And they're changing, the SKUs, every 30, 60, 90 days. We don't have a lot of SKUs in commercial real estate, and the way that people work, they need much more dynamic products. And so they can't do that though without a digital platform that makes it very easy for them to reposition, say, a floor to be used for something else, right? They're very good at the bricks and sticks side of the business, but they need the digital tools then to market it, sell it, monetize it. It's not just as simple as the kind of core competency of like, all right, we're going to set up an amenity center, right? They need to monetize it differently. And so we provide all the tools for that, and it connects into the occupier, right? So it makes it easy for the occupier to, buy and onboard and ultimately use the space to get the ROI that they need.
And if we go back 15, 20 years ago, office space consisted, I don't know, IT dropping a computer and a printer in there and a mouse and keyboard. That was about it. But of course, we've all got more tech than that in our own homes now, and how we manage heating and lighting and entertainment and so much more. So another big trend we're seeing, especially in the office space, is modern smart buildings using IoT sensors, integrated systems that enhance the workspace so it doesn't feel like we're stepping back in time when we go into the office. And another thing that caught my eye here was that HQO's recent acquisition of, is it Symbiosis? Because that brings a portfolio of smart office solutions with IoT software into the building. So tell me more about that, the kind of capabilities and what tangible improvements that it brings to these buildings too, because again, it's quite new, but there's an old saying, isn't there, that the last best experience you have anywhere becomes your standard experience for what you want everywhere. And this kind of buys into that too, right?
Yeah, that's exactly how we feel about it, which is, and you see this in a lot of B2B categories. So, as the consumer experience gets better in certain areas, B2B tends to follow, right? It's the consumerization of B2B. And so we saw that in IT, right? A lot of, like, you think of Slack as a great example of, the old way of buying enterprise technology and how burdensome it was set up and all this. And Slack, when it first came out, was such a magical consumer experience that, ultimately was a B2B product. So, the same thing is happening in physical products. Tesla's obviously an example of that in terms of the quality of the car, and it's just different, right? And so, with regards to the office, your point about IoT is really interesting because buildings are computers now, right? Like they're more and more becoming computers, but they're substantially, in an exponential way, more complex because when a computer gets manufactured, it's manufactured centrally and it has the same sets of components as every other computer that comes off the assembly line. Whereas commercial real estate, as more and more of the components get wired up and connected to the internet, it's a hardware platform that is the most bespoke computer in the world. No one is the same as any other, right? The layout of the floor plates is different. Oftentimes they have different systems, even if they're owned by the same group, right? So in order to create that kind of operating system level software, you've got to be tremendously good at your coverage of integrating with different systems, and you have to be very good at config in terms of configurability across, different setups of every single building. And, if you can do that, though, the richness of the experience to the end user, the more things that are physical in the environment that, work through the internet, create more experiences for the end user to engage with. So, as you noted, everything now is IoT connected. Some of the experiences are worse, right? And so we see this from like a consumer experience perspective of, I was talking to somebody the other day who was just killing themselves to try to turn the lights off on their phone when the light switch was just right there, like hit the light switch. So, we're cautious with our customers where we say, like, where is technology going to aid the end user? The end user is the North Star. And where is it something that it's nice to demo, but it's not necessarily more efficient. So, we're seeing a lot of gains and better experience in terms of how IoT is making the built environment better. But there's also still work to be done there for sure.
And there's a lot of hype around AI at the moment, but even AI is only as good as the data that you give it. And HQO's platform generates a wealth of data about occupants and how they interact with their workplaces, with their space, and generate so much data around amenity usage to traffic patterns and so much more. So I'm curious, how do you leverage data analytics to help improve the real estate experience for tenants and property owners? And also, how do you address things like data privacy and security when talking about all these sensors in a building?
Well, it's in terms of the standard in this space, because it is a predominantly leveraged industry, and so it's an industry that tends to be run by accountants because it's been so stable. When you think about commercial real estate is needed, right? Like it's to a degree, it's not really an option, but work now can happen anywhere. And so it's become very different in the sense that there needs to be an orientation around the tenant. Even the fact they call it a tenant, they have a different name for a customer, right? Like, so it's not a very customer-oriented business. So, we think about the term landlord, it goes back to feudalism. But the industry, in terms of the improvement of orienting around the tenant experience, like, you can't fall off the floor. Like, they didn't care before, and the industry kind of broke, great financial crisis, and it's been trending up, and they have to care because leases are shorter, tenants have significantly more leverage, they can get out of leases earlier. So, like the rest of the world, they've got to earn the loyalty of their customers. And so, from a data perspective, if you go all the way up to the top of the capital stack and you look at these, major institutional investors, right? The sovereign wealth funds, public pensions, all these things, they have tremendous amounts of money in commercial real estate, and they have no idea if the customers use the product or if they're happy. Which, if I went to my investors and I was like, yeah, we have a bunch of people using software, don't know if they use it, and I don't know if they like it, like, I'd get fired. So there's just major disruption coming to this, because it's quite frankly, and not to be hyperbolic, but like, it's insane how little information they have on the experience of the customer in the building. And so I think the really good operators have already started to make adjustments here. And it's big change management and transformation, right? They have to act and look much more like a hotel business, everything from how they brand to how they have consistent experience across properties, not just treating the lease at one property as, ultimately the customer experience, but, they need to develop experiences across properties. They need to understand the consumer journey. They need to understand that every person in the building is the customer, not just the person paying the rent. So, there is a lot of data that I would say is very typical in other industries. And once you organize that data, there's a tremendous amount of interesting things that AI can do on top of that. And so the term smart building was really originally just, a friend of mine puts it this way, where he said that was just a way for Cisco to sell us a bunch of stuff. Now, with the foundational technology, and if you break apart AI, when we think about, let's say, natural language processing, machine learning, predictive analytics, those are the things that a smart building is really just a litany of workflows, right? Take the visitor management example of where I wait in the lobby, I have to write it, all this. Can we automate one workflow? And then can we automate your experience, say, getting into a garage if you drive? Or can we automate your experience submitting a ticket or, booking the amenity? If you can stack all those workflows in an automated way where AI can start to make those, significantly more efficient, that ultimately are the building blocks of a smart building. If you can make a smart building and you stack smart buildings, that's how you build your way up into a smart city. So, AI is unlocking kind of what's been a buzzword, and I think it can start to become reality. And I think the data concerns and the privacy concerns, commercial real estate is having the benefit of being slow, so they get to learn from the mistakes everybody else has made, right? Yeah. So I think it tends to be a very thoughtful industry about security because they deal with physical security. And we're seeing that manifest in terms of how they think about, data security, which I would say is a very positive thing.
And before you joined me today, I was reading and doing a little research on you guys. And one of the things that stood out was that you've suggested before that property owners might just be the key to making our cities smarter. So what are some of the innovations or changes that you see in how we could, in the future, work better, interact with our office spaces better? And also, how do you plan to lead or maybe even contribute to this future vision of smart buildings and connected cities? It sounds incredibly exciting, but what kind of role do you see you guys playing in them?
Yeah, look, we're launching in something called the Quantum City Initiative, and really what we're talking about. And look, I'm of the technology industry. I've got a lot of friends in the technology industry, and we hear from a number of kind of the tech crowd these grand visions of building new cities, right? I think the Andreessen crew and some of the people out in California have a company called California Forever, where they're trying to build a new city. the former CTO of Coinbase, bought an island off of Singapore. He's got a concept around, new country formation where you crowdsource digitally people who have shared interests to create a new society. Like, I love the idea of innovation and great new ideas. I also, where our focus is with the Quantum City initiative is how do we take what we have in the cities that are built? We encourage all the new innovation, but how do we help these cities make quantum leaps forward in progress of modernizing their infrastructure, modernizing the experience that people have? Because if you do that, ultimately that's what's going to drive economic progress. And when you go look at the UK and how much GDP is created in London and Birmingham and kind of the clusters of cities, it's significantly important. It has a power law, right? Like, we tend to drive most of our economic output where people cluster. In the United States, the 19 top economic zones produce over 50% of our GDP, which is more than every single country in the world except for China. So the product of the city is critical if you believe economic growth is critical for national security. So our initiative, the Quantum City initiative, we've partnered with MIT, and really what we're doing is just creating a network of people all from different cities, essentially in the Western world, where kind of the people who are most engaged in making their city great and making it a better experience, we create local chapters and boards. And it's like, how do we solve the kind of typical problems that, frankly, I just don't accept, where people are like, you can't do that because of bureaucracy and all that. It's not a good answer, right? We see in Singapore, we see in Dubai, we see these places where they don't have certain things that are legacy, where they're just, they have a digital pass across the city in Singapore. They have digital workflows in Dubai where more than 50 city services are almost fully automated through the internet. So it's not a question of whether these things are doable or not. They are doable. And if we don't do them, ultimately the Western world falls behind, which I don't think is a good thing. So we're trying to kind of create a group and a community outside of HQO that's really for the benefit of everybody, where it's like, how do we share best practices? How do we start to create benchmarks? How are we smart about, bringing the best minds in different cities? Because we tend to think of it like an open source computing platform, where it's like, look, we're trying to build technology tools that everybody can use, but similar to Linux or Android or, pick your example, we're looking for people to essentially fork the system. Like, we don't think there's one right vision for how a city should be, ultimately run. So how can we kind of play our part in providing, tools for people to use it, and they come up with creative new ways to create great experiences. And, it's great that London is different than New York, right? Like, we want that diversity. So that's really where we're focused.
And HQO's mission is ultimately about connecting real estate to people and creating great workplace experiences. That's one of the things that put you on my radar, because I always say at the end of every episode, technology works best when it brings people together. And you're using tech to make offices more people-centric. So it's not just about the technology. But, of course, not everything about a great workplace can be achieved through an app or a sensor. So in your view, what are the limits of technology in creating connected people-centric spaces? And are there any aspects that still require that human touch, or maybe more part of the organizational culture beyond what technology can provide? And how do you ensure that your digital tools complement rather than replace those human elements of that thriving workplace and those water cooler moments?
Yeah, look, a big part of the reason that, I spend my time on this problem is that I'm dismayed with, the face in the screen that we see. I've got 3 little kids, right? I don't want them, ultimately becoming zombies staring at the screen, which you can see sometimes with how addictive these technologies are. So I personally believe that if we do our jobs right, our technology is slightly invisible in that it should facilitate you into the physical environment and then let people engage with one another, right? So, we are very specifically not an advertising-based model, so we don't need to, measure stickiness and time on app and time on screen and all these things, which we think is a very good thing. All of the data suggests, there's this great research on what they call the blue zones, right, where people tend to live more than 100 years. And you can take diets out of it. You can take all this information out of it. But one of the critical things is human connection and community that, ultimately drives longevity. And so if we think about, are we enhancing life? I think the best way you do that is by connecting people. And part of the reason that I'm, so passionate about cities is that obviously there's no greater manifestation of bringing people together than a city, right? Like the number, it's very measurable. So, I feel really, I think it's really important that there are technology companies that are not kind of envisioning a future where, we have headsets and, we have these little avatars and we're like, we don't engage with each other in person. That's terrifying to me. And that's not what I like at all. So, we view it as kind of really the core central piece of our mission. Can we create tech, because it is inevitable? Can we create tech that ultimately gets out of your way once you get people together? And I think that's a good end to strive for.
And HQO is currently active in more than 250 million square feet of properties around the world. So, that must mean that there must be so many different real world examples of its impact. So let's try and bring to life everything that we've discussed today. Are you able to share a success story where your technology has made that tangible difference for whether it be a building owner or property manager or a tenant? Any stories that you're allowed to share them?
Yeah, look, we touch over 1.4 million end users of real estate throughout our kind of product suites. And what I would say is we have multiple kind of databases where we just collect feedback from the end users. And so the consistent theme, we've got good stories of ROI for our landlords. We help them keep big tenants and, they drive more NOI at the building. We have kind of all those that, obviously we use to drive sales, which is important for our business. But I would say the thing that motivates us the most is we've got this one database just where it's people saying, hey, the amenity activation that brought, flowers into the lobby for Mother's Day, like gave me a sense of community. I felt purpose being at the building. I made new friends, like those things that you can't really quantify and put into a pitch deck. I think are really, really motivating and important. And so, we've heard about, the little things like that. I would say probably the best story of like true community that we saw was at, one of our customer buildings. There was a shoe company, a 3D printing company, and a beer company, wildly different businesses. But, the application actually ended up bringing them together in a way where the executive teams across the companies would go on bar crawls together and they'd like form this friendship group. And then it drove down into the ranks of the business. And you had this like really interesting community across three very different businesses. So the beer company would go on Fridays and set up happy hours for the other two. The shoe company made custom shoes for, the people that were in the building, and the 3D printing company would make these funny things of their logos and all this stuff. So I don't know. We never would have predicted that when we started the business, but when you bring people together, you see, human creativity is pretty inspiring.
Wow, what a fantastic story. Man, that is incredible.
Mm.
And for anybody listening that would like to find out a little bit more information about anything we talked about today, maybe they want to join one of these communities, just find out more information or how they can get involved, or just contact you or your team. What was the best starting point for everything HQO?
Yeah, if you go to hqo.com, we'll hit you with a bunch of different pop-ups to capture that email. But if you're specifically interested in the Quantum City initiative, it's qci.hqo.com, and you can submit to join and help create a chapter in your city. So we'd love to hear from people on that.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. HQO, I love how you're leading this transformation of the way people experience real estate by converging data, technology, and the customer. But what I love more than anything, especially at a time where there's a certain amount of fear in some quarters or suspicion around smart cities and smart buildings, is really, if we this is a tech podcast, but if we strip away all the technology, it's not even about tech. It's about connecting real estate to the people, making it less about structures, walls, windows, floors, halls, and indeed technology, and all about the people within them. And long after we've finished this podcast today, I will remember that story of those three companies and how they come together and how technology brought them together. But just thank you for bringing all that to life today.
Well, after all that, I think we're going to try to hire you, Neil, because you said that better than I could.
Wow. I think what resonated most from this conversation with Chase is this quiet shift from smart buildings to thoughtful ones. Spaces that don't automate access or optimize temperature. Spaces that don't just automate access or optimize temperature. It's time to think bigger than that. It's about fostering real connection. And HQO's approach isn't about adding more screens to our lives either. It's about creating technology that almost fades into the background so that people can come to the foreground. Whether it's streamlining flex space bookings, gathering real-time feedback on tenant sentiment, or helping cities evolve through that Quantum City initiative. It seems that HQO is showing that the built environment can be just as dynamic as the digital world. And at a time where terms like smart city often come with scepticism, Chase makes a compelling case for why we should focus less on novelties and more on necessity, better infrastructure, better interactions, and ultimately better experiences. So what does your workplace say about you and the people in it? And as we think about places where we work, collaborate, connect, innovate, how can we use technology not to replace human interaction, but to enhance it, make it easier? Hopefully you're inspired as I am after listening to Chase today. But let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear how your office, your city, and your workplace culture is evolving in a way that's using technology to put people first. Email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. But that's it for today. So thank you for listening as always, and I will speak with you all again very soon. Bye for now.